Thank you guys so much for being here. As Alyssa mentioned, I'm the CEO of an organization called Liberty in North Korea. We're an international NGO, as mentioned, and we focus a bulk of our work in working directly with the North Korean people. And I'll share a little bit more at the end of my talk in terms of what exactly it is that we do and why you should probably get involved with helping us. So the first slide that's going to come up here is actually a well-known image. It's a satellite image, here we go, of North Korea. And so this is what the country we're going to be talking about here today. And as you can see, most of this country is completely blacked out. To me, when I see this photo, what it represents actually is the fact that there is tremendous economic and social progress that South Korea has achieved in such a short period of time. And if the conditions permitted, that North Korea too could actually achieve the same type of progress because it has the same potential as South Korea. But the conditions don't exist today for that to be possible. And the reason why is because of the government. So instead, 24 million North Koreans today live in one of the most closed and repressive countries. And they face this repressive government that prioritizes absolute political control and regime sustainability at the cost of completely stifling the North Korean people's potential. So, a lot of times people will ask, how is it that the North Korean government has been able to maintain such tight control over such a long period of time? The North Korean government, more than any other authoritarian government throughout world history, has been most successful in being able to maintain control for such a long period of time because of the fact that they place such a high priority and emphasis on controlling the informational and ideational environment inside of that country as a key priority, as a key strategy in order to control the way people behave and what they think. This is how they try to control society. And so as you can see, and as many of you may already be aware, the North Korean people, in terms of their information environment, North Korea is the most closed in the world. The government maintains control by maintaining a monopoly as a single source of information and ideas inside of that country. So, for example, all television and radio sets are set to receive only government broadcasts. There is no internet access inside of that country, with the exception of a few select elite. Phones inside of North Korea, North Korean phones cannot call internationally. They cannot make calls outside of that country. And so these are some of the ways in which the North Korean government has placed such a high priority on controlling the information environment and keeping the North Korean people intentionally closed off from the outside world. But on top of that, the North Korean government also pumps an inordinate amount of propaganda and ideology from a very young age into the North Korean people in a form of extreme indoctrination. And so because of this, this is how the North Korean government has been able to control North Korean society for so long. In addition, there is a zero-tolerance policy for any form of political dissent. And this is enforced through a network of political prison camps inside North Korea. These camps are very reminiscent of the Soviet gulags and the Nazi concentration camps. The conditions are absolutely horrific. About 2 years ago, in 2014, the UN published a report after a year-long investigation into allegations of crimes against humanity that were being committed in that country by the government against its own people. So what the report found was that the gravity, scale, and nature of these human rights violations reveals a state that does not have any parallel in the contemporary world. Crimes against humanity in North Korea entail extermination, murder, enslavement, torture, imprisonment, rape, forced abortions, and other sexual violence, persecution on political, religious, racial, and gender grounds, the forcible transfer of populations, the enforced disappearance of persons, and the inhumane act of knowingly causing prolonged starvation. So this sets the stage for the type of environment that the everyday North Korean people face inside of the country. This gives us a glimpse at the amount of repression that the North Korean people face. But despite this, what we do have hope in is the fact that despite these tremendous challenges that the North Korean people face, it makes the situation seem impossible. But Many changes have actually been happening over the last 2 decades that point to social changes and trends that can give us hope that there is in fact change happening, and it's coming from a grassroots level, and it's being driven by the North Korean people. But in order to understand how these changes came about, we have to go back to a very tragic time in North Korea's history in the 90s, when North Korea experienced a severe famine, one of the worst of the 20th century, where it's estimated that up to 1 million North Koreans starved to death in that country. One of those people being Joseph's father, and you'll hear more about his story today. But out of this tragedy emerged an opportunity. And what you saw was the emergence of grassroots markets. People decided as a survival mechanism to take matters into their own hands. And they were able to go out and to begin to trade and to get the goods and the things that they needed for themselves and for others that the government could no longer provide for themselves, that the government could no longer provide for them, or that they wouldn't provide for them. So what we saw happening was actually with this grassroots marketization and the proliferation of these markets was actually North Korean people taking matters into their own hands. And before the 1990s, before this famine, what you saw was that the state was central to the North Korean people. It provided everything to the people: information, technology, food, ideology. And then what happened was this shift after the 90s, after the proliferation of these markets, and people being empowered through these markets instead to be able to then access the things that they needed apart from the state. This shift is very significant because these markets became a catalyst for North Korean people, actually, in order to now utilize the markets as also a grounds for which they could then exchange ideas and information and even technologies that were actually helping to accelerate the erosion of ideology of the state. So the markets are very important in terms of some of these changes and social trends that we see emerging over the last 2 decades. So some of these major trends that we recognize are here. The loss of control of the economy and the rise of capitalism. North Korea today is essentially a market economy. Many people are not aware of that. The second is the weakening of North Korea's information blockade and the introduction of unofficial foreign information. Again, the markets became a place where foreign information and illegal foreign media were coming in through devices and through technologies like USBs and DVDs that people were smuggling and brokers were smuggling in and are being traded and are being viewed and shared across the country. The third is widespread corruption, and this corruption is important because it enables all of these things to happen. Fourth is the emergence of human networks outside of government-controlled space and normalized shared disobedience. And this is very important also because there is no civil society in North Korea intentionally as a way in which the government has set up this system within. But as a result of the markets, it gave an opportunity, a platform for people to be able to connect with each other and to develop bonds of trust. And this is also very important. Fifth is the rise of the Changmyeong generation. This is the equivalent of North Korean millennials. And they are a whole new generation of young people in this country that have a very different relationship with the government and the state than their parents' generation, because they grew up in a time where they never relied on the state and never received anything from them. And the last is the impact of defectors who have resettled in South Korea but maintain contact with their home communities. So since I don't have time to expound on all of these, what I want to do is actually talk primarily about number 6, the impact of defectors, because this is the key area of work that our organization does. So as a result of many of these challenges that North Korean people face, in addition to the famine that happened in the 90s, we began to really see a flow of North Koreans leaving that country in the mid to late 90s, and they've continued to come out since then. This here outlines the path that North Korean refugees will take in their escape. And you'll see it's a little bit crazy because right below them is South Korea, their final destination, most of their final destinations. But because of the DMZ, one of the most heavily fortified borders in the world, they're not able to cross through that border. So instead, they escape into neighboring China and then try to make their way out through this sort of modern-day underground railroad, which is about 3,500 miles long and takes them from the border there of China, North Korea, all the way to Southeast Asia. That's longer than the distance of New York and LA. And so this is the underground route that many North Koreans have taken. In fact, tens of thousands of them have taken over the last decade and a half. And so what we see here actually is that once they get into China, this is not an easy route. This is not an easy journey. The Chinese government does not recognize North Koreans as refugees. Instead, they claim that they are economic migrants and that they have the right to be able to find them, arrest them, and forcibly send them back to North Korea. And if North Koreans have illegally left that country, as almost all of these refugees have, and they are forcibly sent back. Many of them could face severe punishment upon being sent back into North Korea. And so the situation for them in China is extremely dangerous, and this is really where organizations like ours, other missionaries, NGOs, and even brokers in the underground are able to step in and to help North Koreans who are there, who are at high risk of exploitation. You know, at the peak of when refugees were leaving that country in the early 2000s, you saw thousands leaving every year and making it to South Korea. At that time, it was estimated that 70 to 80% of female North Korean refugees were being trafficked or sold because of how at risk they were, at risk of exploitation. They had no rights. They had no one to protect them in that country. Today, the paths in which people are coming through have become a lot more established. There are more organizations, and there are groups, and there are family members who have already made it out that are able to facilitate for their way to come out quicker, sooner, faster, safer. And there are also more people like you guys that are supporting those efforts on the back end in order to help more people to make it out safely and more quickly. So one of the most important reasons why we work with North Korean refugees is not only because of the humanitarian imperative and the opportunity that we have to help them, but also because of the fact that North Korean refugees are playing one of the most important roles on this issue. And it's a unique role that only they can play, that none of us can play. And that's because of the 30,000 North Koreans that have resettled in South Korea today. It's estimated that more than 50% of them have been able to reestablish contact with their family members inside of that country. And they do so through illicit Chinese cell phones that have been smuggled into the border. And it's through that they're able to communicate with their family members, sharing and sending information in and out of that country through these relationships. But secondary is also the flow of money. This community of North Korean defectors sends, on average, anywhere from about $15 million a year $15 million a year back into that country to their family members. And that money is crucial in accelerating these changes that we believe are happening, that we know are happening. These very important social changes. It's accelerating these grassroots marketization. It's providing for their family members to enable them to buy the goods and the things that they need. And it's also enabling their families to invest in their own market activities, to protect themselves. It's increasing their families' ability for more human security. And this map here, the hotspots of change, are areas where we believe change is happening at a faster rate, and a large part of that being because of the fact that these are key areas where defectors have come from and where money and information is flowing back into that country. So we have an opportunity to work with more North Korean defectors and refugees, helping them not only in their escape, but empowering them in their resettlement. The more successful they can become, the more opportunities that they have in order to be agents of change on this issue. And we truly believe that North Korea is one of the most difficult challenges facing humanity today, but that the North Korean people are the best solution for that. And you know, I think one of the opportunities we have here today is to listen to the story of Joseph Kim. And it's such an honor to have him here to share his story. If you're not familiar with his story, I think you'll be very touched. And I've had a chance to know Joseph since 2007, when he first arrived here in the United States as a refugee, as a URM, an unaccompanied refugee minor. And it was really through meeting Joseph that really brought me even further into this issue. Because as you hear Joseph speak, you'll get to know that despite the incredible challenges that he has overcome, and despite the tremendous things that he's had to witness and do in order to survive, in order to make it to this point in his life, he is one of the most tenacious, incredible, gentle, and kind people that you will ever meet. And so it's my honor and privilege to introduce you guys to Joseph Kim, who's here with us here to share his story. I made you nervous now, huh?
Oh, yes, very nervous. Thank you for that kind words.
Joseph's like a brother to me, so he knows that my goal here was to try to embarrass him a little bit.
You succeed.
Very good, very good. So what I wanted to do was actually start off with a few questions, just because I'm sure there are questions that all of you have, so that Joseph can share his story, and then we'll make sure that we have some time at the end to open it up for some Q&A as well. So to start off with, Joseph, can you share a little bit about your life in North Korea?
Sure. I've been asked for this same question for so many times, but every single time I struggle, I find it challenging to answer it because I think there were so many things happened and I don't know where to begin. But before I say anything about my life in North Korea, I also wanted to say that even though it's probably one of the darkest places in the world, it is still a place where it's so close to my heart because it's a place where I first experienced or taste what happiness was. Or I remember I was the youngest child and the only son in the family, and my mom was always sick, so she didn't have much energy to play with me during the day. And my sister, who was 7 years older than me, so she was always in school by the time I was 5 years old. And my father was working during the day, so I was always alone. Sometimes I was hanging out with my friends near in my neighborhood. But I remember the happiest moment for me, I think, was whenever I went out on the street waiting for my sister to come back. And I mean, I was very young. I didn't know what direction she was gonna come from. But I do remember that what she wore in the morning before she went to school, it was the school uniform with a white shirt with a blue skirt. So there I was, 5 years old. I was sitting on the street just waiting for, and whenever I saw people were approaching with that same color of uniforms, I always was excited that, that would be my sister. And when sometimes I got disappointed because it was not my sister, but my sister eventually came, and I just remember the moments that I was so excited to play with her, and she was probably one of the nicest and the most kind sister I have ever can ask for. And she would always read me stories that she read or learned in class, and I always loved being with her and playing with her. And she was just like another mother to me. So that was like my earliest childhood memory of being loved. And my father, of course, he would always pick me up first when he came back from work, and he would sometimes take me to an ice cream store nearby my house and buy me ice creams and along with some cookies. And those are my earliest childhood memories, which I think I appreciate. I'm grateful to have it because, but the Great Famine began later, and that totally changed my life as a child, but for my entire family. I started notice that grown-ups are whispering or talking about how a grandfather nearby my neighborhood died of hunger. And at the time, I didn't know what that was, what that really meant. But I think even as a child, you could kind of read the worrisomes or the anxieties from your parents. I think those are noticeable, even for a child. And I didn't know what it was, but I knew things were not as great as before. And of course, that my family also affected by the famine. When I was 12 years old, my father also died of starvation. It was my first time ever witnessing someone dying away in front of me, especially someone who was so close to me. In the same year, my mom and my sister decided to go to China to look for food and possibly earn some money to come back. My sister and I have never been lived separately, and I always thought that she would be by my side all the time. And before she was leaving to China, she had promised me that she would not make me wait for too long, and she would come back shortly afterward. And that was the last time I saw my sister. In China, what happened was that my mom didn't have much choice, but she had to let my sister go. What I mean by this is that my mom had to sell my sister to a Chinese man, so that at least that she could be saved. She could, and I think she thought that would be a better life for her than going back to North Korea, where if she was caught, then she could face severe punishment. And I think as a mother, I think that was probably it was the only option she had, but also was the best option for her. And of course, my mother did not know about the sex trafficking industries. She didn't aware of it, and I don't know even till this day where my sister is. But my mom came back, and it was her decision to at least save me from another starvation. And my mom came back to explain to me why that my sister wasn't with her. I mean, I was very young. It was very hard to process. I think for that reason, I think for a long time I had a love and hate relationship with my mom. But now that I have become adult, I think I can at least understand a little bit. And my mother, for later, she was trying to go back to China to look for my sister, but she was caught in North Korea, and as a result, she was sent to a jail, prison camp, and that was also my last time I saw my mom, and that left me as a homeless, an orphan on the street. It was I always had seen homeless kids, children begging on the street, but I never thought that would be one day I would become one of them. And I think one of the hardest part was to learn how to give up my pride and personality and be able to ask for leftover soup from strangers. But I had to do it, and I did it because I noticed that kids who were not being able to ask or find that courage to ask for leftover food, they were slowly dying away, and I was scared, and I realized that I would also face similar destiny if I don't speak up. I also used to work in a coal mine. I remember the grown-ups they were having difficult lives too, but I think they were so sad for me, or at least sympathized. They were just, I think they were trying to find the easiest job a 14 years old kids can. So that was how I lived. And now I ask myself, or in retrospect, I think one of the reasons why I was able to keep up and keep fighting was that I had never given up on hope that I would be able to see my sister again. And every night before I went to bed, bed by mean like find a place under the bridge with this empty stomach, I always dreamed or hoped that my sister would come back the next morning. And I think that kind of hope gave me strength to survive. And so that basically sums up of how what was it like.
So you experienced a lot of very difficult things at such a young age, and you made the decision to go to China when you were 15. Is that right? So can you explain a little bit about why you decided to finally leave North Korea, and how dangerous it is to leave North Korea?
So there is, at least at the time in 2006, there were two different ways to escape North Korea. One, where you bribe the soldiers or the river guards, and you go to China. But of course, that price, the cost of that amount of money that you have to give to soldiers it's a lot of money that I didn't have. And if I had that much of money, I would not take the risk of being escaping. The reason why I decided to take that risk, even though I knew that how dangerous it was, I had to make that decision because it was my last try to survive, and I lived as a homeless for over 3 years, and I just did not see any hope to survive, and I knew that if I do stay, I would eventually also I didn't know like what my future was and was going to be, and I thought that it was about time. I mean, I didn't have much choice. It was either I would sit down and wait until I die of starvation, or at least take that risk to go to China to look for my sister. And so I decided to leave North Korea, and I didn't have money to bribe, so I just tried out of nowhere, and very fortunately I made it to China, and I was able to escape North Korea successfully. And I think going into China, my expectation was to find the man who had sold my sister or brokered or made the transaction between my mom and the Chinese man. So I was hoping to find him, but I realized that by the time I went to his house, he passed away just about 1 day before my arrival. And I didn't know what to do because my plan was not to live in China. My plan was to look for my sister and find some money and go back to North Korea. I don't know, I can't explain why I thought that way, but I always thought that I have to live in North Korea. I never thought of living somewhere else. And that's why I also didn't bring any family pictures, because my initial plan was to meet my sister and go back to North Korea. But of course, I couldn't find my sister, and I think in Korean there is a term that when you're so hopeless, the sky turns into yellow color. I know it doesn't make sense, but I think for me, I didn't even have a strength to look up sky, because I certainly did not plan. After I did not think that what to do. I didn't know what to do, and I think it was just probably one of the most difficult time that in my life, I think.
Can you talk a little bit then about why you stayed in China then and what life was like in China? And then essentially you didn't go back to North Korea. You ended up here in the US. So how did you find your way here?
I first 2 weeks it was during the winter time, and I went house to house, door to door for leftover food in the mornings and nights. And during the days, I would sleep in the mountains or abandon the house in the rural area in China. The reason why I kept staying was that at least I could find some food. And if I go back to North Korea, first, there is a huge possibility that I would be caught. And second, even if I don't get caught and I sneak back into North Korea, there were no promising futures or options that I had. And later on that I learned that Christian or churches, when I go, they give some helps. And the first church I went, they gave me some food and clothing, and along with $20 yen in Chinese. And I thought that at the time I was like, oh, maybe if I go to 10 churches, I will have 200 yen, which is probably equivalent to less than $30 US dollars. But it was big enough. It was enough money for me to at least go back to China and have some. I would not. At least I would live like multiple months without working. But of course, that I turned out that not every churches give $20. 20 yen. So that plan totally crashed. And later on, I found that a church in China offered me to stay, live there. And while I was living there, the church people were looking for sponsors who would potentially take me to their home and give me a shelter and food. I think one of the conditions to go with a sponsor that I met in China was to change my names. I was asked change my name as Joseph, and only if I do it, then I would be sponsored, I would be helped. I thought about it at the moment. It was very difficult and it was very emotional because growing up in North Korea, especially after I became homeless, I pretty much gave up everything that I had. Human dignity, or like personal pride, personality, that didn't matter. My concern day to day was to find for the next meal. And but only one thing that kept me or remind me that I was still a person, I was still a human being, was that the name that I got it from my father, and that was the only thing that my father had left to me, and that was the only thing that I had been able to protect or preserve. So momentarily I asked myself, do I really have to even give up my name so that I could survive, just get some food and place to sleep? I thought about it, but then as a 16-year-old kid, what choice did I have? There was not much I could do. I could either go back to North Korea facing so many uncertainties, or yeah, so I decided, you know, for the moment being, let's live, let's try to live this life and see where it takes. So I decided to change, accept that conditions. And you might be wondering, why did I keep my name as Joseph in America? The reason why I kept my name as Joseph is that it turned out to be that the sponsor who had taken me to their house was one of the most kind person that who genuinely wanted to help me, and I thought that one way to honor her sacrifice was to keep my name as Joseph, and that's how I kept my name as Joseph.
So because of time, I'm going to just kind of fast forward a little bit here. North Korean, the way that Joseph came out actually in 2006 it was, is a little bit different than the way in which I had described here, because he had come out in early 2000s. A lot of North Koreans that were in China were trying to go in through various embassies and consulates in China in order to try to leave the country that way. But that way became virtually impossible later on, which is why more North Koreans began to come out of the underground railroad. But Joseph was an individual who was able to go in through a consulate actually in China. And after spending some time in the underground with this incredible grandmother that took care of him, he was connected to our network, and we were able to help him to get into this consulate, and that's how he was able to get to the U.S. Come to the U.S. as a refugee. So coming to the United States, I guess one of the last questions, because I want to make sure we have some time for people to ask questions too. So I guess one of the last questions that I'll ask you is, coming to the U.S. is so different. You know, this is such a different place than North Korea. When you first came to America, what was it like for you? I mean, what was something that was difficult, funny, strange, unusual for you in kind of coming here and learning about American culture?
I think it was another challenging in a sense that I knew how to survive, or I knew how to find food, but I didn't know how to find out or learn about myself. I think so. That was one of the challenging things. I think everyone told me that I have that complete freedom to do whatever I wanted to do, but I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I think finding identity and purpose for my life was it was really difficult. But I think one of the strangest or the funniest thing was that, when I was waiting in American consulate in China, I decided to study some English words with a Korean English dictionary. And I remember learning a word, survey, and survey by means in Korean dictionary or definition of survey is at the train stations we have in New York City. And I knew what they looked like. So I ended up going to Richmond, Virginia. That's where my foster family was. And I remember my first time going to Subway sandwich shops, and I was thinking that I know this might be really stupid, but like it's a true story. I went in and I was thinking like there is some ways to connect the underground, the trains, and I was like I couldn't find a foreseeable or possible entrance to the ground, and I think I was so confused, and I just didn't know and I think that was very confusing moment, because I was like, I guess America is so well developed that there is invisible sort of ways to connect each subway shops. And that was probably one of the...
Cool. Thanks for sharing that story, man.
So stupid.
No. You know, I think there's a lot of stories like that, you know, even when like some of our North Korean friends go to South Korea and the first time they go into Starbucks, they're so confused because they have no idea what like Americano or cappuccino, these are like all foreign words. And so I think it's a great experience for you to have. There's lots more like that, so I'm sure you guys can ask Joseph more about some of those experiences. But I wanted to actually open it up for some questions because I know that we only have a little bit of time left. And so if anyone has a question, okay, great.
Thanks for coming. I think that was a very kind of, I don't know burst, but very heartwarming, like kind of a somber story that has a very good ending, sure. But everything actually seems like worked out, but I'm not sure if like that. How is the situation for those who are still like? What's the majority situation? I'm like maybe looking at one or a few, and I'm feeling very good about it. That hey, something is taken care of. But that's my thought. I'm not sure if that is a question. My question is like a little broader. You're probably one of the unique people who have in the whole world who have been in North Korea through China, and now you have seen United States. Then, so in terms of that wide difference that I'm seeing, like completely dark, I was actually opened up Google Maps and saw where it is North Korea, because I didn't see in that map. And then I realized, oh, is that water? Is that North Korea in the middle? So now I realized the whole thing was black. What can one is that what's the majority situation now? And another is that if you think in terms of the different countries, what can they learn from each other about the human values, and like what are the things that you at the last can people cling to and give them that so that they don't completely destroy themselves?
I will take part of your answers. I think that you raised a really important questions. You know that my life has been changed and I'm in a good place. But what about the others? You know, this is actually a challenging for me as well. I think for that reason, for example, like I should be the first person to keep thinking about their lives and sufferings every day. But in reality, I think I'm mostly concerned with how to keep up my grade, GPA, and how to pursue or what to pursue. And I think mostly I am concerned with my personal visions and dreams. I think that's why I'm also very interested in ethics in philosophy. But the reason why I came out to this event and the reason why I decided to do this is that it's basically I see that it's a responsibility that I have to share, and I see having a freedom of living here and opportunity to speak here. I think I consider this as one of my responsibility to tell people. And while just because I had a difficult past experience does not necessarily mean that I have a license to ask you or pressure you to make certain contributions for the cause. I think what I can help is that if you are motivated to involve, and but if you're not uncertain whether your time and resources worth it, that I think I can help it. I can assure that it is worth it. And worth it in a sense, not directly for your life. The next morning you wake up, you will still have difficult times waking up, go out of bed and come to work, even if you contribute to the cause. But whatever you decided to help, I can say that someone else's life, like someone other North Korean, another Joseph's life can be changed, where he or she could come go to South Korea or come to America and be able to experience the type of life that we have. And I think that I can answer. And yeah, so I think one way is just to really remember them, and that's where the actions can be started.
Joseph, thank you very much for sharing your story with us. As you shared that, as you moved to America, you kind of rethought about yourself, about the values that you have, the dreams that you have. Somehow you mentioned part of it. Could you share some of your dreams that you have as result from these reflections?
Yes, I think the problem with me is that I'm interested in so many things. I find myself spending nights on learning how to hack Wi-Fi. I don't know why. I thought it was very interesting. Basically, I would just follow what 17-year-old kids tell me what to do from YouTube. I find myself spending time for days and hours and hours. I also find politics and philosophy very interesting. And I think I've been taking philosophy classes. I really enjoyed it, but it was also a lot of work. And I also took an international relations class, and I think it was also interesting, but also it was something that I get it quickly. So my goal is to learn, focus my time in where I can do well and where I find myself doing, enjoy doing it. So my dream is one day, and philosophy on the side, I think I wanted to do it, read it on my habits. And with that knowledge, I hope that one day when North Korea opens, I hope to go back and teach the philosophies, hopefully, or especially ethics I'm most interested in. So those are my dreams. And for now, recently I heard someone saying that the reason why the purpose of studying is to find out what you didn't know or how much you didn't know. Now I think about it, it's very obvious statement, but I think it has also very profound meaning, because knowing what you didn't know or how much you didn't know is one way to find my identity and myself. And I believe that I greatly enjoy studying for now, and so that would be my dream, continuous studying, and hopefully one day I can go back and teach philosophy, ethics, I hope.
Thank you.
I think this will be the last question.
Actually, I have two questions. Okay. One is, I think it's more for Hannah. So I'm really curious about once the North Koreans escape out of the country, and either they decide to stay in China or move to other countries, what is their status? Like nationality? I mean, nationality is definitely North Korean, but what kind of citizenship do they have? And I think South Korea has a way to support some citizenship for North Koreans, but do other countries have those support? And second question is, I'm actually from Korea, and I say I'm from Korea, and everybody say South or North. So I can assume that many of people are going to be surprised that if you say, it's for Joseph, sorry. When you say you're from North Korea, they will have a lot of questions, and they'll have reaction to you. I'm curious to know what kind of reaction you get when you tell people that you're from North Korea?
So I personally have not been to South Korea, so I wouldn't know. I don't know what the reaction would be if I was in South Korea. But I think in America, whenever I meet South Korean friends or people from South Korea, they're very open. They're very curious to about know things, and but there was one time that I was in South Africa for another conference. It was called the One Young World, and basically 192 countries send young leaders from each nations, and it was. And during the time we were waiting for the opening ceremony, in front of me there was a delegate from South Korea, one man and one woman. They asked me, "Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from North Korea." And they were like, "No way! Like, how can you be here?" And then we talked a little bit, but then I think the conversation just dropped because we didn't really know what to talk about afterward. But I think we started, instead of talking about politics or the complicated matters, we started asking like, "Oh, how long did your flight take it to here?" Or "What was it like?" And we started talking about very basic conversations. And we, during the 4 days of our conference, we become so close. We would share meals and eat meals together. And I think that was the closest experience that I have, or the reactionary that I saw from South Korean people. And in terms of status, I'm sorry, I kind of lost the track of it. But
so the status then for North Koreans in China is they're illegally there. So the Chinese government, because they don't recognize them, refuses to acknowledge them as refugees. But they are technically under the UN definition of refugee surplus, meaning they qualify as a refugee because of the circumstances they would face once they've left their country, meaning because of the risk they would be at if they were to be repatriated. And so they do qualify under that definition. And so the international community recognizes them as refugees once they've left North Korea. The Chinese government does not. And so that's one of the reasons why, NGOs like ours have to play this role in between, because governments are very limited in terms of what they can actually do to help North Korean refugees in China, as are agencies like the UNHCR, in fact. They're very limited in terms of how they can actually help North Koreans. And that's one of the main reasons why we bring them out through to Southeast Asia. And in Southeast Asia, there are countries there where they are recognized or where they do have an opportunity then to apply for refugee status or for resettlement in countries like South Korea and the United States. South Korea will essentially sees them as South Korean citizens, and so they do receive that citizenship pretty quickly upon resettling. Coming to the US, for example, or other countries, they come as refugees and then have to undergo the process of getting a green card and then can apply for citizenship as well. One quick point on kind of what you had mentioned before too, and being from South Korea, you're probably also aware, but when North Koreans go to South Korea and people find out they're from North Korea, sometimes it's not warmly received in South Korean society. And, it's one of the biggest challenges that a lot of North Koreans do face there because of this type of discrimination they can face. But I think a lot of it really just comes from a challenge with the narrative in South Korea on North Korea. And I think that's a real opportunity in terms of us trying to figure out a new narrative, a new framework to help young South Koreans understand this issue as well. And so one of the really sad things is some of the North Koreans we work with in South Korea actually, when they ask where they're from, will lie and say that they're from, they're ethnically Chinese Korean, Chosunjuk, or will say that they are just from the South. That's why they have a strange accent, because they want to hide the fact many times that they're from the North. And so, our hope is with the work we do in South Korea, and if there's any Googlers in South Korea that want to be involved, working on trying to change the narrative around this issue, especially in South Korea, is going to be really vital in the coming years. So I think we've run out of time. The last thing I wanted to just end on, and I guess we don't have the slide. I don't know if it's possible to find it, but we wanted to just give people a chance to get involved if you're interested. And Alyssa mentioned that you guys will be starting a group here within Google. And if you're interested, encourage you to please check it out. There are opportunities that we're hoping to work closely with the group here within Google. One obvious way to get involved is obviously to give. You can give your money, which we will happily take. You can give your travel credits, which we will also happily take. You can give your time if you want to be a part of this group, volunteering. We need all sorts of help, and sometimes it's even with just optimizing our own online campaigns and things like that as well. And so those are some easy ways that you can get involved. If you have the means and are interested, you can actually donate to Rescue One Refugee. And that information is all on our website and also on those boards in the back there. And the last thing is, obviously, you can just follow us. Keep in touch with what we're doing. And if something comes up that you're interested in, please feel free to get involved, reach out to us. And we'd love to have you be a part of what we're doing. So, I want to really, really thank Alyssa and also Gloria for organizing such a great event. Thank you guys all so much for being here today with us. And especially a huge thanks so much to Joseph for sharing his story with us.